Welcome to the NTT Health and Wellbeing Podcast, a show exploring the digital transformation of our everyday welfare. On this episode, professional satisfaction is a multifaceted metric encompassing not only compensation, job responsibilities, and team camaraderie, but also important well-being pillars like mental health. Based in South Africa and India, respectively, Michaela Voller, Chief Human Resources Officer of Dimension Data, and KN Murali, Senior Director of Human Resources and Administration at NTT Ltd, offer a global view on the emphasis organizations must place on the individual needs of team members while centering employee wellness.
So welcome everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome KN, who is the Senior Director of Human Resources and Administration in NTT Ltd. He's based in Mumbai. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you around such a core topic, which is around employee wellness, which obviously impacts all of us. So welcome, KN, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Michaela.
What I really wanted to discuss today is, as we return closer and closer to normal, and I put that in inverted commas because I don't think there is a normal, and as our COVID-19 pandemic continues and we figure out ways of trying to sort of manage this, there appears to be a sort of wellspring of worker dissatisfaction that I don't think any of us could have anticipated. Could you tell me broadly how you view the overall landscape of well-being, or professional well-being, should I say, in the environment that you find today?
I think the one thing that the pandemic has done is really completely changed what we all took for granted, what we all thought was business as usual. I think it's completely turned it upside down in so many different ways, starting with the fact that, in India, speaking of what happened, one fine day, overnight, we went from being a set of people, company that was working, coming to office, working from office, to one that went to working from home because the country announced a lockdown. And suddenly you had people wondering what's going on. How are we going to cope? What's going to change? Nothing was known. Nothing could be expected. If at that point in time, anybody had said that this was going to go on for 2 years, it would have sounded incredulous. But that's really what's happened. And with that, there have been so many things that have happened, so many challenges. It looked like things were coming back to a sense of normalcy. And then we had something called the second wave hit us like we couldn't have imagined. And again, everybody was scrambling. Everybody was trying to stay safe, stay connected, work. All of this was coming at the same time. So the whole thing that we've all experienced over the last 2 years is something that we just couldn't have imagined or expected. And this is true personally, this is true professionally. As a company, we've seen challenges at the workplace, in work. People have had to cope with uncertainties of so many different kinds. And as you can imagine, that when you have so many things change so rapidly, everybody's sense of balance has been sort of challenged and questioned. And with that, there's been so much of, I wouldn't say as much dissatisfaction as not really knowing what to do, what next. And that's been the case for us for a very long time. And we're all struggling. I'm sure you've seen the same thing in South Africa, where you're based. I think you must have seen much the same thing in both the work environment as well as what people are facing and coping with at home.
Okay, and I completely resonate with what you've said. I think so many of the people I engage with and speak to on a regular basis are experiencing so much anxiety and personal hardship. I think on a daily basis, we're dealing with people with hospital admissions or losing a loved one, or being very, very unsure of what will happen to them should they get the illness. On top of that, we see some of the social challenges that people are facing on a daily basis, which is really around addiction or divorce or financial ruin or fraud in some cases, where people are feeling a bit desperate. So I think mental well-being is just as much as physical well-being needs to be normalized in the workplace. And if we really want employees to thrive, I think we are going to have to figure it out and foster a culture where vulnerability is actually accepted, and it's okay to start talking about not being okay.
Absolutely. This has never been more important than it is today. I completely agree with you. And a country like India, we've got a lot of reluctance, a lot of social stigma, if I were to use that word, associated with talking about mental well-being. Well-being is no longer about any one facet or any one dimension. I mean, you have physical well-being, emotional well-being, financial well-being, you talked about intellectual well-being, well-being at work and occupational well-being. All of these holistically come together when you talk about well-being. And all of these have been questioned. All of these have been challenged in some form or the other for a lot of people in the company. But speaking specifically of mental well-being, as you rightly said, it's no different from any other kind of well-being, except that it's not spoken about quite as much. And it's extremely critical that we have an organizational culture that allows people to open up without feeling that they're going to be victimized, they're going to be in any form or shape. It makes them any more vulnerable than they already are, which they will be if they're going through these challenges. And I think when we introduced the employee assistance program in India, I was a little unsure whether we would have enough people picking it up and using the service. And I was very surprised to find that more people reached out for help than I would have imagined for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And I'm hoping that more people reach out and use it as we continue to make this available for people.
Absolutely. And I think, with COVID, putting this sort of mental health under the microscope and almost forcing people into a position to request help and ask for support, what do you think the role of the organization should be going forward in supporting and helping our staff and their mental well-being, considering these sort of cultural stigmas, gender stigmas that go with it, as well as, the sort of trends that we're seeing in our employee base, and what's the role of the organization in assisting them?
I think employees need to know that the organization is there for them. It's an extended family, and that they could feel comfortable reaching out to the organization as much as they would feel comfortable reaching out to some friend or family member to talk about it. I think the organization has the ability to make a lot of resources available to people in a timely manner, in an inobtrusive manner, in a manner where they can feel secure in talking about something that they would otherwise feel reluctant to talk about. I think it requires a fair amount of sensitization. You talked about leadership. I think leadership will play an extremely important role, not just by making people feel comfortable and safe and secure in talking about it, but more importantly, educating the larger workforce, the managers and others, to deal with these situations as they present themselves. So one is to make resources available for people to reach out to when they need the help, not just for the employees, but for the employees' families, who also contribute to the well-being of the employee in so many different ways and are themselves facing these challenges, as well as educating and letting the larger organization know how important it is for the organization and each of them to be there personally to support and render all forms of support to the employee.
Absolutely. I think the challenge that I've seen, though, and it's interesting that you mentioned leadership and initiatives in the same sort of sentence, because the challenges I've seen is, as staff and employees, we sort of are led to believe that burnout, and when you challenged with coping, that we'll just throw a few fluffy interventions at you. You need to do a bit more yoga, or you need to spend time in nature, or God forbid, you need to go and get a hobby. And the reality is that the various factors that are causing burnout in the organization, I feel, are due to the fact that we've got this always-on culture and overwork in the environment. I mean, others, I think, are around a lack of fairness or lack of recognition or a values mismatch to some extent. But coming back to that, I think the organization can't do those sort of engagement support efforts that we did early on in the pandemic alone. I think leaders are going to have to figure out a way how to use technology to certainly understand this concept of overwork and always on. And, my favorite strapline is we're saying we've got these robotic expectations of human performance. And I think we've run out of runway. I think we've run out of capacity to perform at the level that high performance cultures have asked us to perform at for so many years. And I really do believe that this is a leadership deficit. I think there's a lack of intellectual rigor and discipline at a leadership level to coordinate our work efforts in a way that can be translated into automation and technology to create what I call a corporate cadence. And I firmly, firmly believe that what will differentiate the organizations that actually survive this pandemic or not will be those who understand how to coordinate and align the workforce so that we are not overburdened and overworked and overwhelmed. So with that in mind, one of the things that we really need to use is data and metrics to sort of evaluate where this downfall of overwork is sort of creeping in. What are you using today to sort of evaluate concepts like job satisfaction or productivity, efficiency, even burnout for that matter? And what do you think you can do to track this going forward?
So before I talk about the technology element, actually there are, you used the word burnout, and we've heard the word burnout used quite a bit in the pandemic. Actually, burnout is there are two sides to that coin. One is the burnout aspect, and the other one is the engagement aspect. So if you look at the negative element of the manifestation of the pressures and challenges that an employee or anybody faces, it leads to burnout. And the positive element to deal with that is the engagement element. Typically, burnout has three aspects to it. There's an exhaustion aspect, there is a depersonalization or a cynicism aspect, and there is an inefficacy aspect. Simply put, people feel worn out, they don't have energy, they feel fatigue, they have negative or inappropriate attitudes towards clients, irritability, or this reduction in productivity, capability, low morale, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of scientific work that's happened around burnout. And if you just think about those dimensions that I spoke about, there are enough ways in which we can measure what's going on with our employees and how they're feeling about each of these things. Are we visually seeing these symptoms? Do we need to measure these in some form or shape as we go along? So we know how people are feeling, what people are thinking. Sometimes we're so caught up in our day-to-day work, we're so caught up in the high-performance cultures that we're all used to, that we don't necessarily take a step back to see what might be lying in the background or lying in the shadows, and possibly that's something that we need to do. And I think data analytics and metrics are going to be very, very important in analyzing this. The other thing that you touched upon, which I think is extremely important, is gone are the days that what we do can afford to be seen as symbolism or tokenism. I mean, all these programs, I'm not taking anything away from all the programs that we do on a routine basis, but it has to go beyond it. It has to go to addressing what an individual has. And for the people that are looking at and working with these people should be able to observe and take note of what is going on in their life. So then you can make interventions happen which have relevance, meaning, and are impactful for those people, addressing those very specific problems. So data and analytics is the one big tool that we have at our disposal to look for clues and act basis what we find in a very targeted and specific manner.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've been led to believe that sort of our personal worth or career advancement or financial security are all achievable if we just emulate, I suppose, those who've come before us. The subliminal impact of sort of a high-performance culture is literally the driving force behind this sort of great resignation. And unless we start becoming very, very specific of some of the data or insights that we're given, I don't think we're going to make an impact. I think we're going to be driving this great resignation as opposed to the great attraction of talent. So, I mean, with that in mind, the NTT 2021 Global Workplace Report revealed a disparity behind how executives and operational employees are professionally experiencing and adapting to sort of the pandemic and post-pandemic era of working. Why is it that you believe, in your opinion, that there's such a gap between those who are seemingly at the top of the organization and those who are doing the work, so to speak? And what do you think we can do to close it?
I think that's a great question. Across the board, if you look at the 2021 report, you will find that there is a significant difference between what the CEOs have been saying matters and what the CEOs possibly are acting upon versus what the operational employee is thinking, talking. The key, I believe, is because when you get down to the trenches and see what's troubling an employee, and I'll give you an example of what's happening in India. In the city that I'm in, Mumbai, as an example, right? Mumbai is a city where it's not uncommon for an 8-member family to live in one room, which is 100 square feet, right? Now, imagine that a person has to work from that home. Much as we would like for it to be a hybrid workforce, working from home is not an option for somebody like that. They want to come back to the office. When we look at it from the standpoint of the leadership, what matters is to give the flexibility to an employee, and our policies and our strategies are driven by some understanding of what a section or a large section of people want. But does that necessarily appeal to every individual based on his or her circumstances? Not necessarily. So a lot of people today, if I were to look at my own teams, a lot of people want to come back to work because they want the relief. They want to be away from all the pressures and challenges that they face at home that they've not been used to, but now have seen for a couple of years. I think in a lot of different cases, you're going to find something similar taking place, that the leadership team cannot afford to be abstracted from what is going on at the ground level. If our strategies are not taking cognizance of what is happening in the ground, we're going to run into these difficulties. And that's what I think is reflected in the report, saying the CEOs and the leadership teams and organizations are driving a particular set of objectives that may or may not resonate with what people down in the field may necessarily want.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating that you say that, because we've almost got the inverse. Leaders want to get back to the office and micromanage people and watch what time they arrive at work and leave. And I think traditionally they've been able to tell people, you will be here on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then all of a sudden that strategy doesn't work as sort of different variants raise and legislation changes and regulations get sprung on us. But I think that what is certainly not going to go away is that we are going to have to accommodate for both. And as much as CFOs and CIOs want to avoid that complexity, I think this is where the CHRO is really coming to the fore to say that we have to have a people-first strategy. We've got to accommodate everyone, regardless of circumstance, not exacerbate some of the exclusion and discrimination we've seen in the past, and rather foster inclusion and diversity. And I mean, I've certainly had my children arrive on work calls and dogs barking in the background and doorbells going. And in South Africa, we've got huge power issues. So we, as you're saying, a very relevant point, all of a sudden your screen goes blank and you lose out on participation. So I really do. It's such a good example using both of our countries to show how different and disparate our circumstances are, never mind our economic levels and our personal circumstances at home. So I really do believe that leaders are going to have to accommodate what I call a hybrid working environment and not just a flexible working environment, which is around mobility. Obviously, we work for a technology company, and I often look at HR departments and wonder, how technology is going to be utilizing technology to better serve employees 5, 10, 15 years down the line. How much of an investment should employers be making, in your mind, in technologies that look after the employee and unburden the stress from some of our staff? Or do you see that as the role of the employee to figure out on their own?
No, it certainly is the responsibility of the organization to help employees in this. Again, it goes back to my previous point, which is every employee's need is different. Every employee's expectation is different. Every employee has something different that makes him or her tick. How do we make sure that we're a tech company, and how do we make the best use of technology to reduce the burden on employees. If burnout is caused because of a set of 5 or 10 different things, how can we use technology to address that? How can we take away those things that are causing the stress? How can we monotony go away? How can we make repetitive work go away? How can we do something that makes it fun? How can we make something more engaging? How can we make things available to people when they need it, how they need it? If you take learning and development as an example, learning and development, everybody recognizes that today in the world that we are in, where technology is, I mean, skills are so transforming so rapidly, we need to make sure that people are upskilling themselves, investing in themselves. And yet we find with all that is available, people are not doing it. So how can we use technology to identify what can be made to work for them? If today somebody came and gave me an opportunity to do something that I'm not interested in, no matter how good it is, it could be from Harvard, but if it doesn't excite me, I'm not going to do it. And yet it could be something from somewhere that is not a big name, but if it's something that I'm interested in and passionate about, I will make the time and make that happen. So how do we use data, which is again technology driven? How do we bring engagement using technology? How do we bring learning using technology? How do we make a better experience for those that are in a hybrid work environment, make their lives easier? So there's a lot of opportunity for us to use technology and make it easy for employees to feel connected and fun to work in our company.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ken. I think often the way I've interpreted technology is into sort of 4 or 5 buckets. And I think a lot of people get confused about this, particularly from the history of where HR comes. So for me, the first thing is systems of record. I mean, that's traditionally how HR departments came about, was let's record keep to see whether you're clocking in for work or not. And I think tech has evolved so much in the HR space where we've moved from sort of systems of record, which are HRA systems or service platforms where you can access sort of service, and people think that's a digital experience. I think it goes beyond that, where we've got to start looking at what I call systems of engagement, which is really around business applications that facilitate an experience and can connect with individuals. And then finally, systems of insight. So once you've got all those data points, from not only internal data, but external data on social media platforms, etc., very much what our marketing colleagues have been doing for years in the consumer space, and use that in an ethical and responsible manner to improve the workspace for our staff will be absolutely key. So, systems of record, systems of engagement, systems of insight. And I think I'll add the last one, which is emerging in my mind. And that's really tools of enablement to enable the sort of hybrid working model. I think too often, and I said it earlier, people confuse a flexible working environment. Here's a laptop or an iPad and you're good to go, with what we call a hybrid working model, which is really around a structured option around both a physical and a digital workplace that are completely in sync with each other. And I think the core point here is that whether our employees are remote or at home or in the office or in a coffee shop or on an airplane, regardless of where they are, they have the full employee experience that is ultimately secure by design. And I think that is a very, very complex problem to solve. So with that in mind, what is at stake if we don't get this right?
First of all, before I respond to that question, I love the way you group them together in that fashion. And I completely agree with you. And that is a big shift, both in mind and in execution. But that's really where the creativity of all the applications that we're seeing today, and we're going to see a lot more of that come our way, that will allow us to make this whole engagement and experience wonderful. I think there's a lot to look forward to. I don't even know what's going to happen in 15 years, but certainly over the next 5 years, I think we're going to see tremendous change and tremendous amount of work and wonderful work coming up in terms of making employee engagement both rich and meaningful. I mean, the question that you just asked now, the fact is that attracting and retaining talent has become more difficult today than it has ever been. Companies are struggling to cope with the situation with the great resignation. I think The most important thing, though, is that intellectual capital today is at a premium. And that capital is looking at the world at work through a very different, more balanced lens than ever before. After the pandemic, that lens has completely magnified the importance of holistic well-being, and it's brought it right up front for all of us to see. And therefore, what this means is that pretty much everything is at stake for companies for whom intellectual capital is its currency. And even for those companies for whom intellectual capital is not the currency, it is in a way indirectly the currency that they also operate with. So, which means for every organization dealing with employees, employee engagement, employee experience, employee well-being, most importantly, in a very well thought out, structured, holistic manner, is really going to be critical even to the very survival of organizations. That's really what's at stake, in my opinion.
Thank you for listening to the NTT Health and Wellbeing Podcast. For additional resources and to continue this conversation, please visit www.global.ntt/health and wellbeing.